All right, 5 past. Welcome to Topics in Historical Linguistics. So what I thought we would do this term is to spend 2 sessions on going through the 2 set text as if preparing for the commentary part of that, and then we'll have 2 sessions with real specialists on how to pick your own examples from texts, on the one side literary text, but also just kind of graue Literatur, they are called in German, so publications that aren't on a literary level. So we'll have Dr. Malena Ratzke, who is an early modernist, talking how to comb an early modern text, the very enjoyable Rollwagenbüchlein. So it's stories to be told among travelers, a bit like Boccaccio's Decamerone, when on the move. Slightly bawdy punchlines, and to how to harvest this for your topic forms of address. And then we'll have the launch of the book by Henk de Berg, who is a literary and cultural historian at Sheffield University, who is publishing, to coincide with the American primaries, a book on a comparison of lying across Hitler and Trump speeches, which should be a really insightful lecture for your topic, language of totalitarianism. So that's the background for my choice of 4 perhaps on the surface unconnected looking topics. And the way I want to approach the set text is by looking in a way as a medieval student would have done, who was told to access each text, the so-called accessus ad auctorem, by asking quis, quid, ubi, quibus auxilii, cur, quo modo, quandum. So where, why, what. So we'll start looking at time, space, structure, and then focusing in on language of Helmbrecht. So the time period for Helmbrecht is, roughly speaking, the second half of the 13th century. And as with most actually medieval literary text, we only have internal literary evidence. We don't have hard charters. We don't even know whether Wernher der Gartenaere is a pseudonym, a nickname, whether he even was called Wernher, or whether it's just a literary figure. We only can place this text within a network of Romans, courtly Romans, and didactic texts. So if you think of medieval texts not as a canonical one author by the other text, but more as a linking network of references, allusions. If you have studied the Tristan, you will know about the Literaturexkurs, how each text positions itself within different traditions. So rather than trying to figure out who exactly was the biographical figure behind the text, it's helpful to think, what is he expecting his audience, their audience, we don't even know whether it's right, to know already where to laugh about jokes, because it might be, there's a chair. Yeah. And how do other texts then react to it? So the two dates that we have for the text are literary references. So the terminus postquem, it must have been written after the figure of Neidhart became a stock name to be recognized. Because he can expect his audience to know Neidhart stands for this figure of somebody who is on a sparring match with the peasants, which is quite fitting for the Helmbrecht text. Somebody who has some bawdy humor in it, but also relation to the courtly sphere. So it's name-dropping Neidhart, or in Middle High German, Neidhart, again, isn't so much about a specific biographical figure, it's about placing his own writing into the context of that time. And then Helmbrecht becomes itself this type of stock figure for the... There are chairs outside if you want to pick one. Helmbrecht becomes a reference point for und die Moral von der Geschichte, don't no Übermut, don't try to become something that you aren't from your background. And in that capacity, Helmbrecht is quoted by a didactic poem called Seifried Helmbrecht. So we see each other. And another interesting take on more the image connected with the Neidhart is from roughly the same time the author figure for Neidhart. So it's slightly later, the Codex Manesse, probably the most famous manuscript of the Middle High German period, was written as a kind of retro project. So somebody wanted to gather all poems that had been circulating and songs and sort them according to genre and according to the status of their supposed authors. But since there weren't any photographs or even just painted images available, these aren't lifelike representations, but rather they are the distilled essence of the poetry of each of these poems. And so you see here the figure of Neidhart in a situation that is quite similar to the situations you find in Helmbrecht. So this courtly figure, a young man with a Schappel, it's called, the flower wreath in his hair, with a very costly coat. You see these are meant to be the tails of ermine, so a kind of fur lining of a very costly nature, being in a kind of dance, turning into a Schlägerei, so a kind of post disco pub crawl with these peasant figures that are trying to aspire to a higher status with their short swords and grappling with him. So Neidhart had become famous already 50 to 70 years after his death for portraying this type of situation. And in this capacity, he is quoted in the Helmbrecht. So I'll just read you as a first example of the language of that time, this reference, which you see the line levels come fairly early in the story, when Helmbrecht, the young man up to no good because of being pampered by his mother and sister and giving too rich dresses, goes for a dance with his new coat, a bit like the coat, but a coat that also has long sleeves. You might know from the song Green Sleeves, long sleeves are always a sign of aspirations beyond your station, because you can't proper do manual work with long sleeves. So he has been given this coat with a costly sleeves and with little bells attached to it. And the narrator muses on comparing himself first to Helmbrecht and then to Neidhart. And as you know also from other stories, those who have done Gregorius, whenever the narrator speaks, it's a kind of signal for attention. So he says, ich will des mit Wahrheit jähen, dass ich wie demselben Knaben den Wieben het unho erhaben. I can justly claim, so in truth, claim that I be dem Knaben, so next to this young man, wouldn't have cut mustard, would you say that, with ladies. So I wouldn't have been in high regard, I wouldn't have been lifted up, erhaben. And then he describes why. Da der Ärmel an das Murder gad, all umbe was du nat, behangen woll mit Schellen. So there where the sleeve meets, the mitre is the kind of bodice, there it was round and round, behangen, hung with Schellen, little bells. And these bells are a bit like with Morris dancers, but also they denote fools. So a fool's cap has the Schellen on the top. Dir hört man Lute hellen, wenn an dem Reien sprang. So you could hear them loud and clearly whenever he was jumping to join the dance. Den Wieben es durch die Ohren klang. It was sounding through the ears of the ladies. He, all of you will have discussed at some point in paper 4 or even earlier Gregorius, the different terms for women. So these aren't strictly speaking ladies, which would be Frauen, but the more generic term, Wieb, all of the women, showing it was a bit of a mixed company there. And then comes the reference, which allows us to date it. Herr Neidhart und sollt erleben, dem hätt Gott den Sinn gegeben, der könnt es ü gesingen Bass, dann ich gesagen. Nu wisset das. So, Sir Neidhart or Mr. Neidhart. Neidhart, by the way, again, we don't know, is that a nickname? Because it consists of Need, which is modern German Neid, envy, and hard, strong, so somebody who is envied a lot, or whether, but it also existed as a real name, so it could be one or the other. Anyway, he isn't of a top-level nobility, and that also links to Wernher der Gartenaere, which, so the Gärtner, the gardener is hardly a kind of high nobility status nickname. Sir Neidhart, if he were alive, und in Middle High German can stand for several different conjunctions, so not just and as in modern German, but also if, because, and so on. So if Sir Neidhart were alive, he whom God gave den Sinn. Sinn is the mind, brain in a rather encompassing capacity. So who had the mental capacity, the brains, but also the artfulness. So Sinn is also what you think about something. So it's not just the capacity to deliver, but also the artfulness to deliver. If you should, whom God gave this ability, he would have been able, kunde, as Ü, so the address to the plural audience, sing better than I could tell you now. Know that. Singen und sagen can be used more or less exchangeably, but is here distributed specifically because Neidhart is known mainly for his songs, while this is meant to be performed and recited, but not in a song-like, so on a tune. It can be kind of chanted along. All right, so much on the time we can assume the original poem was written. Now the problem is, as again some of you might remember from having read Helmbrecht, that we don't have any 14th century manuscripts. We don't even have proper 15th century manuscripts. The main manuscript that we have is the so-called Ambraser Heldenbuch, of which I'd shown you the figure of Helmbrecht here, which was written between 1504 to 1515. And now, if you cast back your mind to the normal periodization of German, when is also the kind of textbook cutoff date for Middle High German? 1550? 1350, yeah. So it's way earlier than you would expect from any historical dating. So the sound shift occurs prior to then the external events such as Gutenberg starting to print, Luther publishing the 95 Theses. So linguistically speaking, we are squarely in early New High German territory for the Ambraser Heldenbuch, which was again a kind of retro project by Emperor Maximilian, who stylized himself as the last knight. So he wanted to build up an archive of good courtly practice. And for that he had his scribe, who was located in Bozen, which is so far south that it's even off the map here. So Bozen is Südtirol. Copy out these texts. So there is a second manuscript which is slightly earlier, so late 15th century, written in Bavaria, but it's a manuscript that was heavily edited. So there are lots of speaking names in Helmbrecht and kind of in-jokes, references to local places. And the scribe of this second Bavarian manuscript updated all the jokes for his patron. So instead of place names that the first audience would have recognized, he put in new place names. So that's the less reliable manuscript if you want to go back to the Middle High German text. So the text that you've got in the RTB volume and on which then the Reclam edition is built is a back-engineered text from this manuscript to the time of the late 14th century, taking into account the dialectal features of Bavarian, Central Bavarian, and so the dialect covers a different area from the political entity. So Bavarian also includes what nowadays is Austria and South Tyrol. It's basically everything in the High German area. So you have here the dialect map of German dialects with three main areas. The Low German area with the Benrather Linie, the Central German dialects going far further east than modern Germany, wherever there were German-speaking enclaves in nowadays Poland, Silesia, and so on. And then you have the High German area, which includes everything basically south of Würzburg, including also nowadays Switzerland, which has some distinguishing feature like making it High Alemannic, and all the eastern part is basically varieties of Bavarian dialect. And it can be based there partly, as I said, because the manuscripts are from there, but more importantly because the inner literary references seems to expect an audience who would laugh at local references to Bavarian places. So you have a kind of, again, inner literary placing of that. Third element, the structure of the text. So, as I said, we have to assume that whoever wrote Helmbrecht engages with an audience that would recognize literary references such as Neidhart, and also very clearly knows about previous courtly romances. So there is a long speech by the father of Helmbrecht, the Meyer Helmbrecht, so Helmbrecht Senior, about good old times when knights were still knights and ladies still ladies, and that very much builds on Hartmann von Auer and Arthurian romance. So one way to read Helmbrecht would be the kind of double structure, the Doppelweg-Struktur that we see in Erek and Iwein, with setting out from the Arthurian court, going through a series of adventures, returning to the court, and then setting out for a second set of adventures. I've taken this scheme from the DTV Atlas Deutsche Literatur. Sorry, I didn't put it on the slide. So that is the one way of structuring Hartmann's Erek. It has been questioned whether there is this is really the main overarching principle for Erek and Iwein, but it's certainly a pattern of setting out and returning, which you could also read into the structure of Helmbrecht, which is also a kind of universal structure. This setting out and coming home, you have that in the prodigal son story, and you could read also the first part, Helmbrecht leaving on a high note with his costly bonnet and his costly coat, his father's house, and then returning to it as a play on this. But other than the prodigal son, he doesn't come back repenting. He rather sets out a second time, and that's where then this Arthurian structure comes in. And then he returns a second time home, or tries to return home. They're more like the prodigal son begging for his father's forgiveness. But because he already had one return where he didn't pick up the chance to repent, the father rejects him, and he comes to a bad end with the peasants and farmers whom he had robbed earlier, killing him as in revenge. So it's one of only 3 medieval stories to end with the death of the protagonist. Normally you have a fairy tale ending and they lived happily ever after. Not so for Helmbrecht. The other thing that sets him at odds with a courtly romance as a structure is that if you look at the proportion of lines, the fun bit of being a robber knight is just 40 lines, and then the 1 week at home is far more than half of the lines. And so that's where actually no action happens. It's all about dialogue. And so we can here see a different structure coming in, namely that of didactic texts that are often structured in terms of conversations, teaching of morals. So in a way, the action-packed robber life is just the sweet coating to cover the bitter pill of teaching you how to behave rather than how not to behave. And so you have the voice of the father, whether I'd already mentioned his praise of good old times with true knighthood. And there are other didactic elements within the story. It starts off with a allegorical objects, the bonnet, die Haube, his mantle, the cloak, and allegorical elements are scattered throughout the story. So if you read how his companions are called, Lembeslind and so on, it's quite funny made-up names that tell you about their character. And that is something that links closely to the longest German didactic text and one of the most popular texts at the time, Hugo von Trimberg, Der Renner, which was finished exactly 1300, so probably finished slightly later than Helmbrecht, but a representative of a larger genre of didactic writing. We also have Der Welsche Gast by Thomasin von Zerklere. You have texts like Freidank with sayings about how to live a good life. So you have, in a way, the Doppelwegstruktur just as a bit of dressing round a heavily didactic text. I'm a great fan of Der Renner, which I think is a really undervalued text. If you're curious, I recorded 2 years ago a whole lecture series on Der Renner for paper 4. Look on Canvas, and for example, this Bauernbelehrung, where the narrator comes riding into a village, has lots of very funny details. Where the peasants are all lying, picking lice as their hunting exercise because they are banned from hunting bigger animals. So, yeah, nice. Anyway, so this just as a kind of framework, and that's something for you to keep in mind when commenting on linguistic features. You have a Middle High German text, but one that is only transmitted in early New High German form. You might be able to recognize some dialect features from Upper German, more particularly Bavarian, and you can observe use of didactic elements, for example, in names, in the kind of judgmental tone. Now into the text itself, and I'll just read you through the prologue. The fairly short prologue is structured in the same way in which you, for example, have it in Gregorius. You have a prologus praeterem or proemium, so it means a prologue that isn't concerned directly with a topic, the res, that is going to have, it's outside this topic, and it's about how the storytelling is going to take part. And then this is followed by a prologus anterem, a prologue preceding the actual topic, which is more like your normal introduction to a story, where it tells you where things are going to take place, who will be the protagonist, and so on. That's a way to engage with the audience right from the outset. So the narrator sets out a whole scenario how storytelling can happen. And it's a quite skillfully built structure. I've tried to highlight recurrent theme. So it starts with the rhyme Gesicht, Geschicht, and it ends with Geschach, Sach. The Sagen also repeats. So it first sets out a number of possibilities, and then the narrator tells us how they are going to tackle the whole story. If you have read Ewain by Hartmann von Aue, it sets out in a similar way by giving you the different options of how to engage with the story, and also listing different people going about it in a different way. So, einer saget, was Gesicht, der ander saget, was im Geschicht. Der dritte von Minne, der vierte von Gewinne, der fünfte von großem Gurte, der sechste von hohem Murte. Hier will ich sagen, was mir geschach, dass ich mit meinen Augen sah. So he starts off in the present tense as a kind of general declaration of possibilities, and he lists in these topics also different genres. So you can talk just about factual stuff, what you see around you. That would be encountering, writing a political speech, writing about contemporary events. So if you have done Walter von der Vogelweide, Spruchdichtung, who will engage with a question, who should be king? And he says, I see that King Philip is wearing the crown. That tells me he is the rightful king because he has the regalia. So that would be one way of producing literature, talking about what you see. Second way, under is if you count in Middle High German, or it's erstens, also einer, ander, dritte. So zweitens is a fairly modern way. So the second tells what is happening to them. The third person is talking about minne. Minne at that point is already starting to become a kind of technical term for courtly love. So it's not your everyday falling in love and getting married. It's this concept of courtly courtship. Yeah, as you have the word courtship in English, with a elaborate fictional setup of the lady as infinitively more important and high than the man serving loyally and then asking for a reward. So that would be somebody like Friedrich von Hausen producing Minnesang. The fourth person is talking von Gewinne. That would be kind of pragmatic writing, business letters. Der fünfte von großem Gurte, that could be the same kind of trade writing, but Gurt can also mean the spiritual good. So if you remember Walter von der Vogelweide, Reichston, ich saß auf einem Steine und dachte Bein mit Beine, da aufsatzt ich den Ellenbogen, ich hätt in meine Hand gesmuggen, das Kinn und ein min Wange, da dachte ich viel ange, wie man zur Welde sollte leben, der heinen Rat konnt ich da geben, wie man Dünk gewinne, der doch keins nicht verliert. So, and then he counts the first thing you have to retain is Ehre, the second is Gurt, weltlich Gurt, das dritte, der Zweier über Gulde, Gottes Hulde, so the most important thing. So großes Gut can also be to discuss what is the actual good thing, so it can be something like Sangspruchdichtung. Der sechste von hohem Murte, so hohe Murt is a tricky thing. So it's on the one hand this courtly virtue of having the joyful mindset appropriate to a night of ich bin in hohem Murte, so you will have encountered it if you do paper 9 in Morung, or Friedrich von Hausen says, min hoher swebender Murt, so my joyful attitude towards life. But it's dangerously close to Hochmut, which is the loan translation from Latin superbia, so pride. That could be the reference to something like the Arthurian romances who regularly talk about Hohermut. So he sets out all these options, and then he gives a kind of preview of what is going to come. Hier will ich sagen, so Wellen at that point somewhere between a modal verb, also preterite present, and getting lexicalized as the future verb. So to like in English, I will say can both be your intention and the indication of future happenings. And then the narrator claims that he will tell just what happened to them, was mir geschah, was ich mit meinen Augen sah. So, interestingly enough, we had seen the different options he's setting out. He locates his own narrative not among the Hohermut romances, but rather among the factual historiography telling the things as they were. And when it's quite startling, because the first thing we are told is something obviously completely ridiculously not factual. It's this description of first Helmbrecht and then this bonnet, which has on it stories from Troy, from Charlemagne, and Dietrich von Bern. So it's at first a completely contradictory starting point of the prologus praeterem and the prologus anterem getting at different angles. But I would read it more as a signal by the narrator. Don't just take it as entertainment literature, what you're going to get. Take it as something that could happen to you. Because you could be this person being tried at the court. So this section we haven't spoken of about yet. The last 400 or 380 lines before the final rejection are a very detailed trial where 9 of the 10 robbers are then hanged and quartered, while Helmbrecht is spared by just being having his one hand and one leg cut off and being blinded. But so we are told here to read this as an actual account and not to be distracted by this allegorical setup, rather to see the truth behind the story. Ich sag, dass es sicher liechen war, eins Geburensohn, der trug ein Haar, das was Rede und de Fall. Ob der Achsel hinzetal mit Länge es volle Glichen gier. So, what in the Ambraser Heldenbuch Helmbrecht has is a kind of mullet. In German, anybody know how mullet is called in German? It's a very funny word. Fokuhila, vorne kurz, hinten lang. So it's a very much a show-off hairstyle. So he is presenting himself like a footballer. At least the Fokuhila was popular among footballers in the 1980s and 90s, I think, when I was growing up. But what we aren't shown in the Ambraser Heldenbuch, because it's practically impossible, is then the bonnet in which the narrator tells us the protagonist was wrapping his hair. So I've picked this, but this isn't really the bonnet. It must be much bigger, and it's somehow to cover the whole hair, so it must be more like a veil, but with a clear structure. What the audience made of it, I'm not sure. What you also see in the Ambraser Heldenbuch to indicate his Hochmut is not just the hair, but also the kind of gesture in which he puts his thumb around his belt, which is similar to the gesture that Isolde makes when she is appearing at court, where she's using her tassels, or the linking of the fastening of the cloak, pulling it forward, and all of the men swoon and completely bowled over. So he is trying to make this kind of very blasé picture. So, in eine Huben, es 4, du was von Bilden wähe, ich wähn ihr man gesähe so mannigen Vogel Huben, Sittiche und de Tuben, die waren all der Uf genaht. Wollt ihr nur hören, was das tat? So you have to imagine now the narrator turning round to the audience and offering a chance to hear, like in a pantomime. Yes, go on, tell us more. And then it jumps straight into the story. So he gives a bit of background to Henrike. Ein Meier, der hieß Helmbrecht, des Sohn was derselbe Knecht, von dem das Meere ist erhaben, samt den Vater nannte man den Knaben. Sie bede hiersen Helmbrecht, mit einer kurzen Rede schlecht künd ich ü das Meere. Künden, wie verkünden in Modern German zur Alltagsstory. Was uf der Huben wäre, Wunders erzüget, das Meere üch nicht betrüget, ich sage es nicht nach Wahne. So again, the narrator positions themselves squarely with the fraction of telling the facts, not the fiction. Hinden von dem Spane nach dem Scheitel gegen dem Schopfe, recht inmitten uf dem Kopfe, der Lie mit Vogelen was bezogen, recht als sie wären dar geflogen, us dem Spechtharte, out of the Spessart, which is also a kind of speaking name, namely the Woodpecker County, anyway. Uf Geburenswarte kam nie besser Haubedach, dann man uf Helmbrechte sach, demselben Geutoren, was gegen dem Zesven Ohren uf dir Huben genaht. I'll just read through the rest without going through the explanations. As I said, I'll upload the slides so you can look through the linguistic notes. Wollt ihr nur hören, was das da hat? Wir treu ward besessen, do Paris, der vermessen, dem Könige von Kirchen nahm sin Wieb, die was ihm lieb, allsam sin lieb. Und wie man treu gewann und Aeneas von danne entrann, uf das Meer in den Kielen, und wie dir Türne fielen und mannig Steinmure. O weh, dass ihr Gebure solche Huben sollte tragen, davon so viel ist zu sagen. Welche nur hören meh, was anderhalb uf der Hubensteh mit Sieden erfüllet, das Meere üch nicht betrüllet. Es turnt gegen Winstern Hand, wie König Karl und Ruhrland, Turpin und Oliviere, dir notgestalten Viere, was dir wunders mit ihr Kraft worchten gegen der Heidenschaft. Provenz und Arel betwangt der König Karl mit Mannheit und mit Witzen. Er betwangt das Land Galitzen, das waren alles Heiden eh. Wollt ihr nur hören, was hier ist, diese fourth time it is asked. And you have to cheer on more and more. Yes, yes. Von einer Nestel her an dieser ist es wahr, dass ich Ulise zwischen den Ohren hinden, von Frauen Hellchenkinden, wir die Wiele vor Rabenen lieb in Stürmen verloren haben, do sie Slurk Herr Wittige, der Körne und der Unsittige und Dirt Herrn von Berne. Noch möget ihr hören gerne, was der Narre und der Gauch trug auf sina Hauben auch. Als hätt der Gottestumbe vor an dem Lime allumbe von dem Zesvenohren hin uns an das Lenke, das ich bin mit Wahrheit wohl bewähret, nur höret, wie es sich mehret. Man möchte es gerne schauen von Rittern und von Frauen, auch was überhaben, beide von Maiden und von Knabben. Vor an dem Lime sturnt ein Tanz, genaht mit Sieden, die wahren Glanz. Ihr zwischen zwei Frauen sturnt, als sie noch Bitanzes turnt, ein Dritter an ihr Hände. Dort an einem Ende ihr zwischen zwei Maiden gier ein Knabbe, der ihr Hande fier. Da sturnden Fiedelehre bi. Nur höret, wie die Haube sie geprüfet Helmbrechte, dem tumben Räsen klechte. Up to there, the preface, and then next week we'll go and look at proper early New High German, namely Sendbrief vom Dolmetschen. Thanks.